diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us. Give us grace, diligently and honourably, from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us, to the common good in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Please sit. Do we have any apologies? We have no apologies this evening. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Cressler.
I served on a board of the preschool with one of the members of the Happy Hens, so I won't participate in that debate.
Thank you.
It's a non-pecuniary interest. May I stay in the room to watch the debate?
I think you need to leave.
Still need to leave?
Thank you. We have the minutes of the previous meeting. I didn't attend that meeting. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Are there any comments or questions on those minutes? All in favour? Against? That's carried. Is there any matters arising out of those minutes you'd like to discuss?
Not out of the
Councillor Miles.
Not out of the meeting minutes. I was just going to move on this.
I was going to move forward item the Nelson Parade
8.1.
8.1 if we could.
So no matters out of that meeting that we need to discuss?
No.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay. Move Councillor Miles, second Councillor McLaughlin. Right, thank you. We have some removed this item forward to this point. We have some speakers, and I have Mr. John Atkin. Now, I think you wanted to speak later in the.
I'm happy either way.
Would you like to speak now? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor and Councillors. You'll recall I spoke to you in February, and at that time I was the convener, one of the conveners of the public meeting which was shortly to be held to launch our campaign to decontaminate Hunters Hill. Since then, we've established the Hunters Hill Environment Action Group Incorporated. It's a registered charity with the ACNC, and it's taken over the conduct of that campaign. I'm the chairman of HEG. We have over 50 members, mainly a large number of residents of Nelson Parade, and we're governed by a committee of 11, of which I chair. Six of those committee members are residents of Nelson Parade. We have prepared, and I've shared with the General Manager, and I'm hoping he's shared with you, a document headed The Remediation of Nelson Parade, dated the 4th of June 2018. You've all seen a copy of that? What we tried to do, this is obviously a very difficult issue, one that people have been living with and for many years. What we tried to do in that document was set out our purpose as the Hunters Hill Environment Action Group, set out the principles that we work by and our specific objectives. If I can first talk to our principles, which were largely, those of you who attended, and I think most of you did attend the public meeting, I spoke to them when I chaired that meeting. We seek to consider the facts in a balanced, reasoned and careful manner. We seek to promote dialogue and discussion which is respectful and caring, and which participants seek to listen to and understand different points of view. And we're sensitive to the stress being caused to residents by the continuing uncertainty over government action to remediate the site. We've set out there the specific objectives we think we have in our campaign supporting the residents, and we are evaluating the various proposals and alternative courses of action that are being put forward against those objectives. We also wish to work towards supporting proposals or course of actions that can be implemented, that have a realistic prospect of success and that can be implemented in a timely manner, recognising the exigencies or demands of the planning processes. I think it's common ground amongst everyone you'll hear tonight that our preference would be for all the contaminated material to be removed from Nelson Parade, consistent with the government announcement back in October 2011. However, nothing has happened in the last 6 years other than that the government has changed its policy position and made it clear that whilst it's in government, the waste won't be taken, or the bulk of the waste won't be taken to Kemps Creek, And that is a position supported by the Labor Party, and you only need to read the Hansard of the time to realise that that's the Labor Party position. Since then, so we see a political solution to this and the prospect of actually achieving perfection as quite limited, if not impossible. Certainly there's no prospect of it happening in this Parliament, in the life of this Parliament, and the future is uncertain. We have been working or have helped, we've had good engagement with Property New South Wales and our local member. Property New South Wales has developed 4 options which they've presented to council staff. 2 of those options are, we understand, compliant with the planning restrictions of foreshore building lines. And we have encouraged, at this stage, Property New South Wales is having one-on-one meetings with all the residents, consistent with our principle of transparency.
I move to extend, Councillor Sampson, Councillor...
Consistent with our principle of transparency and open dialogue, we have encouraged residents to share reports on their meetings with each other so they can all be equally informed. That's happened in some respects, but not in others. So our basic request, you'll see in the paper, we have raised a number of questions in relation to the proposal. We think it'll be apparent from what's said tonight that there's a clear divergence in opinion amongst the residents. We need to respect that. We think council has a very important role helping all the residents be better informed on this proposal and promoting an open and consultative and transparent dialogue among residents. So we would encourage council to ask council staff and general manager to investigate the points we've raised and others. Can I just, and then be part of a process which saw all the residents being put on a proper footing and then promoting a dialogue to see what's the best way forward. Can I just respond to a couple of points which I have come up in discussion? The first is that there's a suggestion that technical experts have all ruled out on-site encapsulation. That is not correct. No technical expert has actually ruled out on-site encapsulation as not being possible. It's not their preferred option, but it is possible. The second is this comment that the parliamentary inquiry have rejected on-site remediation. That is not correct. Look at recommendation 10 of the parliamentary inquiry, which specifically contemplates on-site encapsulation. The third is the concern about section 149 certificates, which goes directly to council.
Move to extend, Councillor Miles, Councillor Sampson.
Thank you. It's very important people understand that the only contaminated land, or only land that is regarded as significantly contaminated by the EPA, is the very foreshore block, and the source of the contamination is the hydrocarbons. And that will be addressed through this. I don't know what the full answer on 149 certificates is, but it's important to understand what the current contamination comes from that's been declared by the EPA, and it's the hydrocarbons. The solution option 4 is seen by many residents as a good first step because it can be done in a way that's effectively temporary on-site storage, and when a site is found, whether it's the federal government site or some other site in a later parliament, then it can be easily removed from the way option 4 is constructed. The fifth point I'd like to make is the most significant health risk at the moment in this site is the risk of radon gas that is emitted into one household. The owners of that house support further examination of this, and if for their interests alone, I think I'm fair in saying all of the residents most directly impacted by the site and the risk of nuisance from that site support further considered examination of this and would encourage the council to do so. It's a very complex issue. It's one where we need to go about it in a calm, considered way and make sure we're fully informed, and I would encourage the council to take leadership in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Could you stay with us just for a moment? Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So of the options, the preference of the group, and as you say, there's going to be a diversity of opinion. The preferred option would most likely be in a perfect world, full remediation where material is taken offsite, but because these other options have been put, capping and building this concrete barrier and things, there are some in the community down there that are feeling as though that may be a better option to deal with the issue rather than a pie in the sky, Kemps Creek solution.
I don't think it's necessarily the better option, but if I could speak, and I had her permission to speak, if I could speak and translate or pass on the thoughts of Rosemary Manusa, who I think everyone would acknowledge has lived with this problem longer than anyone. Rosemary's comment is, that's perfection. There is no sight of that perfection happening. No one can give any commitment as to when it might happen. This is a way in which things can start to happen. It's a significant improvement for her daughter and son-in-law. She still feels responsible for having sold them that land at the time when she was told it was safe. They're the ones running the risk of the radon gas. Rosemary sees this as a good way forward, potentially subject to understanding it better, a la as illustrated by the questions, but as a good way forward that doesn't rule that out, Councillor, at a later time if there were a different government or a government of a different persuasion. When I say persuasion, I mean in terms of the approach to this issue rather than the politics.
Councillor Williams.
You say it's pie in the sky. It is
I didn't
lawful.
use that.
I use that
expression
as an example.
But the point I'm going to make is that it's not pie in the sky, if I can use Councillor Miles's term. It is a lawful, thought-through proposal to move that material off-site to a lawful disposal point. It is a political issue that's stopping it from going. Technically, it's feasible, there's plans in place. So I don't see it as being something that's put into the background. It's something that is real into the fore. There's a lot of other issues associated with encapsulation. And one I'd like to get your opinion on is that, and because we haven't seen any plans or details of it, but I've heard that it's going to vent the radon gas. So how does that change the current situation? In any case, if it's coming out of a vent in a concrete bunker, then it's going to come out in a much more concentrated form than what it would if it was in its current dispersed mode. So I was just wondering, is that something that I haven't been consulted by New South Wales Property or whatever, but in those discussions, was there any reference made to what happens to the build-up of radon gas within the cell?
Two comments. One, I think the radon gas and whether this is technically safe is one of the issues we say should be considered. And as Property New South Wales would say, this is only at a concept stage. They need to work that up in more detail. But the risk, but if you contrast that against the current position, Councillor, at the moment, the radon gas is coming in an uncontrolled way up a sewer line, and no one quite knows the extent of the danger. So this, we certainly agree with you that the radon gas is one of the critical issues that needs to be examined, and we need ever better assessment on. But that's all the more reason for doing what we're suggesting be done, rather than dismissing this as unworkable or a second-class solution or whatever.
Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, as a follow-up or a second question, I was just wondering, actually it's old age, it's escaped me, I apologise. Can somebody else ask a question and come back to me?
Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Did the powers that be give you any indication of how long this process would take? Going from, considering it's actually in its very early genesis.
I have to be I don't want to overstate my knowledge, because I've had informal discussions with Property New South Wales and an advisor to our local member. The more direct discussions have been quite rightly had by Property New South Wales with the residents themselves. My understanding is that they would, so long as there's support for the further examination of this, like to work that detail up. I suspect it takes at least 6 months to get through a planning process, because whatever their informal consultations now, they'll need to go through a formal planning process with a formal remediation plan, a formal EIS and the like, where some of the issues that Councillor Williams has raised would be addressed. We would be, I mean, that is all the more reason for getting on with it. And I think some people would urge that if we can get a commitment out of this government, which has, after all, allocated $30 million to solving the problem, we should take advantage of that while we can. And that one of the risks of not responding to this is that it would leave us easily characterised as, dare I say, silvertails looking for perfection. It would neuter the issue within this local electorate. We've already had residents who said, what's the problem anyway? It's no more dangerous than a granite bench top, whether that's right or not, but that's the view of some local Hunters Hill residents. So it would be silly not to at least respond positively to the government's work in this area.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams.
I'm over my seniors moment. Did Property New South Wales give you any indication as to who's going to be responsible for care and maintenance, monitoring and future rebuilding of this facility once it's expanded its life? Because the radon gas generation won't cease. Concrete has a lifespan. So the thing will need to be maintained, monitored and eventually rebuilt 50, 80 years' time. Have they given any indication as to who's going to do that or who's expected? Is that something council will inherit? Or
that's a really good
because the cost is quite exceptional.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the options that are currently on the table, some options see the land being sold off into private hands. Other residents, and I think option 4, sees the land kept as public parkland owned by the government, with the government having the continuing responsibility as owner of the land. You'll see one of the issues we've raised is to inquire of government what is the maintenance schedule, what is the lifespan? We've been told 100 years, but 100 years isn't long enough. What is the maintenance covenant that the government will give? And we think that's the sort of thing, that's the benefit of actually engaging constructively with government now. We can have those discussions and get them nutted out in a way that's satisfactory. And particularly if the residents work constructively with the council, they are the sorts of issues we would see being addressed now. That's a very good point, and we agree with you entirely.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you very much. The next speaker we have is Ms. Bolzan Volpato.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors. My name is Deala Bolzan Volpato. I currently reside in Gladesville, however, within 6 months' time, my family will move into 19 Nelson Parade. This is the home of my in-laws, Sir Joe and Paulina Volpato. Back in January 1978, they bought a then vacant block, built a new split-level home, moved in with their sons and have been there ever since. At that time, they had no knowledge of a former uranium smelter on the street. My mother-in-law is now elderly and she finds it very difficult to manage the stairs in her home. About 18 months ago, my father-in-law decided to search for a more suitable property. To facilitate this, they had to sell their home. However, they knew it was impossible to sell for the full value due to the widespread knowledge of the radioactive contamination in the street. Out of desperation, my father-in-law asked my husband if we would buy his home. So we managed to take out another mortgage, just enough to assist him, and now we own number 19. The sale of the house was a transfer within the family, so we had a valuation prepared for stamp duty purposes. This report clearly notes that there is radioactive contamination on a neighbouring property, which contains traces of uranium and thorium. Although we didn't require Section 149 certificate for the sale, a lawyer informed us that he is confident that this certificate would most certainly disclose that there is a contaminated site within the vicinity of the property. Therefore, our lawyer actually advised us against purchasing the home. Just like my husband and I, prospective buyers of nearby properties will have their lawyers inform them of the contaminated site, and it will discourage them. It is council's and government's responsibility to dissolve this prejudice, to clean up the problem properly by removing all contamination. The proposed remediation of the contaminated site by encapsulation will only store the radioactive material on site so that it complies with the relevant contamination standards. Property New South Wales presented concepts where this encapsulation cell will essentially be a large landscaped bunker which extensively cuts into the natural landscape to accommodate it. Therefore, if the site is remediated with an encapsulation cell, what is Council's obligation with the disclosure of information on the surrounding properties Section 149 certificates? Is Council obliged to disclose the proximity to a remediated site and perhaps disclose its contents? It's the radioactive material which renders the contaminated site unique and without precedent, and also negates the saleability of surrounding properties. I do not want to pass this problem onto my children or onto future generations. I'm pleading with Council to pursue avenues to persuade Minister Roberts to sign off the current remediation plan, which would promptly remove all contamination, thereby fixing it properly once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stay with us just for a moment. Councillors, do you have any questions? I wonder if we might have a copy of your presentation. There's some questions in there which we can look at for you.
Sure, absolutely.
If we could. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, which I'm sure you might not be able to answer, but just a general question, possibly staff, from their discussions with Property New South Wales and the EPA. Does the two terms, remediation and encapsulation, equal each other? My professional opinion is that encapsulation is not remediation. Encapsulation is just a storage of a problem. It's not remediating and removing the problem. Has there been any discussion as to the correct terms that we use? Because I wouldn't like to imply encapsulation is remediation if it's not.
There's been no discussions, no.
Because that makes a big difference in people's minds as to whether the perception or the stigma associated with a contaminated site is solved by encapsulation.
Can I make a bit of a comment on it? Sorry, our meeting with Property New South Wales is they said building that encapsulation cell, any references, if somebody was to do a search further on, it would be considered a remediated site. That's what we were told by Property New South Wales, if that helps.
All right, thank you very much. The next speaker we have is Ms. Clark. And I forgot to remind that we have 3 minutes for speakers unless we extend it. So if you don't mind.
Sure. I speak tonight not as the president of NPAG, Nelson Parade Action Group, because no formal vote has been taken, but on behalf of 12 residents who support that I speak against this proposal. They are a significant majority of the residents actively involved in this issue. Our long-held opposition to encapsulation remains unchanged. The proposal removes only the hydrocarbons subject of the EPA management order and up to 5 barrels of higher level radioactive material, the hotspots, and the rest of about 4,000 cubic metres of radioactive material is to be encapsulated on site. Our view is that this proposal is fundamentally flawed. We believe all contaminated material should be excavated and disposed at off-site storage, which is what all residents want as their first preference. Nelson Parade should not be a disposal site. It's a residential street in a conservation area, not an industrial area, and an industrial structure should not be built here. Minister Dominello recently said that this material should not be stored in a densely populated area, but he now proposes to do just that. The government says it has nowhere to send the material off-site and it has to be stored here, but we challenge that. We're told appropriate temporary and permanent sites exist, we know, in New South Wales, but also interstate. And while the government's focused on this proposal before us, it limits their efforts to find other alternatives. Property told us, and we've all been having meetings, these 12 people that I'm talking about, Property told us last week, quote, "We are looking for solutions that minimise political pain." This is the wrong priority. Decisions should not be made for government self-interest, but on expert opinion, best practice, the environment and community needs. The government claims this proposal will restore saleability and market value of our homes. But we're told it would be even harder to sell properties because the contamination be permanent, the structure of physical evidence, and all hope of a normal residential street gone. The EPA has a fundamental principle that contamination should be fully remediated and not passed to future generations. Hence the EPA refusal to encapsulate at Barangaroo. So why pass on the problem in Nelson Parade? We question the government's claims that the proposal will be safe. This government has shown callous disregard for the safety concerns of residents who currently have radon gas emitted into their homes from adjoining government-owned contaminated sites. And who will monitor and maintain this facility in perpetuity and the parkland where radon gas is emitted? There is no experience to judge the safety of this proposal because the government can find no precedent for storing radioactive material in a residential street. I wonder why. Residents are desperate. We want certainty, but we need a solution that completely solves the problem now without more hollow promises that cannot be enforced. Radon gas creates continual health and safety issues, so encapsulating radioactive material is very different from other encapsulated sites. Minister Roberts should immediately approve remediation plan 008-0008, still on hold, which is what the General Manager recently requested. It would force the government to remove all material off-site to appropriate storage to begin within 90 days under the EPA management order. And this is exactly what the majority of residents are fighting for. Just to pick up a couple of points, how long would this project take, this proposal before us? We were told it would be at least 6 months before the studies, the ANSTO, the engineering, because this is a totally new concept to build a structure. Previous plans have not done that. And so 6 months at least, then the election, that's into the election timeframe, then, and so they're at least, they told one set of residents 2021. Secondly, the time to develop the plan is unknown. There's a lot of planning processes to go through. We know the Independent Planning Commission have been delegated the authority to make the decision. And there are numbers of residents who have been having these meetings. We are all impacted dramatically in the street in every way. We're all stuck. We cannot sell. We cannot move. Lots of us are getting elderly. Lots of us are anxious. There are people living opposite. There are people living right on site beside this contamination. And we need to be addressing this now, not some hollow promise that this government will explore this proposal and run into all sorts of problems. We have been down this road at least twice before in these 10 years that we've been fighting this. We need to get on with the plan that is before the government right now, and that's what we should all be doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Ms. Clerk, would you like to stay with just a moment, please? May we also have a copy of your presentation?
Sure.
When you're finished?
Yeah.
Councillor Miles.
Philippa, I take it that the discussions that have been had with Property New South Wales about this encapsulation option,
Yeah.
They're treating as a permanent solution. So
Yeah.
were this to happen, if they're talking about building a bunker for 100 years or whatever, you can assume that that's going to be, they're going to tick that off and not ever explore removing the material then. Is that correct?
It was originally presented like that it'd be a permanent solution. Some residents have suggested that maybe it could be seen as a temporary solution, and that they said that they would look into that and that could be considered.
Have they come back to you on that at all?
No, I mean, this is all in concept. This is all concepts. They don't have this worked out, and yeah.
Okay.
So that brings into the question about promises for a second stage. Would that ever happen? Yes.
Sorry,
Councillor
through you,
McLaughlin.
Mr. Mayor. They also talk about removing the worst of the contaminated to another
Yes.
location. Where's
Well,
the other location?
Also, what we're led to understand is that the up to 5 barrels that would be removed of the higher level radioactive material, Lidcombe can take up to 5.
Oh, okay.
So that's the idea
That's
for those.
convenient, isn't it? Only 5.
Only 5. Well, there's 95 other barrels. There's 100 barrels worth of, so we were told. I mean, again, there's studies that, so the 100 barrels of that level of soil, but 5 barrels can go to Lidcombe and the rest stays in the encapsulated. That's what we were told last week.
Councillor Sanderson, sorry.
Phil, the one thing I
Yeah.
wondered about this, if you're taking 5 barrels, there's no guarantee that the 6th and succeeding barrels are any less harmful than the material in the first 5
Well,
barrels.
that's what I was getting at. Seems strange that they're going to only take, Lincoln can only take 5.
Well, I think the
there's
storage
only 5.
facility there is actually very small, and it's a case of space. That, I mean, I'm not, I
That's
think
exactly
other
right.
experts may know more.
That's my understanding.
It's no bigger than this room.
Yeah.
Councillor Williams, did you have a question?
Oh, yes, I did. I got distracted.
Not 2 in one night, councillor Williams.
Seen this moment again.
I'm just pleased I'm not the only one that has.
Sorry.
All right,
So much information.
Sorry.
Councillor Crassel.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I've been watching this for a while and I'm just awestruck by the strength of the residents and your patience and the way you speak so calmly and determinedly, and I really feel for the terrible journey you remain on. How is the mental health of the residents?
I think you've really put a nail on the head. I think people are incredibly stressed. We're all highly anxious about what does the future hold. We've been through 10 years of hollow promises. You would think the parliamentary inquiry promise would have been a pretty binding promise on this government. So that I think that's a very big factor. I think people are quite depressed about this situation, and they're very desperate. And if there's something dangled before us that they think might happen, they, you know, we want something to happen. We're all desperate. Anything is better than nothing. However, when you stop and think, and that's what these 12 people want me to say, this is not going to solve the problem. This is actually going to entrench the problem, is what they're thinking.
And my theory is, just from what you were saying and what I'm hearing, my theory is that a bit of division and conquering might be going on. Is that
Within the street? Yeah, I would think that's an absolutely fair idea, that there is about 17 houses. Well, it's a very small street, as you all know, and some of the houses are empty and some have been knocked down. But there are 17 families who are actively involved in this issue, and I'm speaking on behalf of 12 families.
And so before this suggestion came along, 17 houses were united in what they wanted. Would that be correct?
Yes, and they are still united in their first preference. The difference is that some people, and the difference is that it's the way you perceive this proposal. That it would this ever, if we answer all these questions that are put before us all about the detail of it, would this ever still result in something that is a satisfactory outcome for the community? Not just Nelson Parade, we're talking about the Huntersville community. And we're talking about the visual impact on the harbour. The impact on the harbour is enormous. Unless they put it underground, which is option 4, is to dig out 4,000 cubic metres of sandstone material and build the bunker under the level of the land so that it becomes like a parkland. That I think is option 4. So there is there's a lot of concern in the whole community, and at the pub test you say to people, this is what they're going to do, people just go, excuse me, this is a residential street. Why would they not just send it to the available site in New South Wales? And we know the answer. They tell us the answer is political, and that's the story. And sorry, yes.
Councillor Sanderson.
One other question, it's possibly one you can't answer, but if anyone knows, I'd be happy to hear. But with this, the proposal that that they remove material from the upper part of the site and fill there. I presume they're going to be digging into the sandstone core to achieve that, if you're talking about that sort of volume.
Yeah. I mean, option 4 is to actually bury 4,000 cubic metres of material under the level of the land.
But
By digging out, excavating, a very large volume.
With a snorkel sticking up to vent it.
With a vent.
All right, if there are no further questions, thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Jenkins. Welcome, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. Can I strongly support what Philippa Clark says, and indeed what the council has done, because I think that letter to the minister, relevant minister for planning, Mr. Roberts, is spot on. It's over 50 years since this contamination was identified in 1965. It's taken 50 years to get to a position where an application has gone forward and a proposal has been made based upon scientific research that all this goes off-site. It's now got down to the stage where Mr. Roberts can sign on the line and make it happen. But oh no, only a matter of weeks ago, suddenly arises, contrary to what's in all these expert reports as the first preference or the number one option of getting everything off-site, is a World War II bunker, concrete bunker, is being proposed by this government to put radioactive material in and vent rayon gas out to the world, is being a solution as a kind of temporary thought bubble, politically motivated by this government. And somebody said about the pub test, I forget who that was, but it doesn't pass the pub test. There's no way in a pub that would get anything more than the derision that it deserves, frankly.
Right.
And so that's why I'm strongly supporting the council's initiative, because that letter actually puts the acid on the, instead of on the community, it puts it on the government. Here you are, you can resolve this. But no, what they come back, no. We'll go through a whole nother process. What, another 50-year process to look at building big bunkers across 3 parts of the site, contrary to planning laws of foreshore building lines. Do you believe in a residential area? You're not supposed to build bunkers, they're supposed to be residential houses. So they haven't even looked at the planning laws to see whether that's appropriate. And somebody talked about division. Now, this community was unified, and that is that the preferred position, but it was their position. Please, all the expert reports have said this should go off-site. Please do it. Then you don't argue about Section 149 certificates, now called 10.7 or something certificates, under the changes last year. But people need to know, and good faith is in the terms of the new Act, and I think the old Section 149 as well. So a council has to let people know, whether they're purchasers or owners, what the true position is. No, the government built a World War II concrete bunker down there with a big sign with hazardous material, don't jackhammer or move onto this. And there's wanting people to come into a park and kids to play there, and radon gas coming out of somewhere in this bunker, covering them as a solution. I mean, it's bizarre, and indeed worse than that. To do that to this community, whether it's people like me who don't live, I'm within the 500 metres, but I'm not affected. These people are affected by it. And it's called, under the Act, this is a remediation site, so declared by the EPA, which means that there is a significant risk of harm to the environment and human health. Otherwise, you don't qualify.
Councillor Williams, Councillor Miles, you've moved to extend. Thank you.
And so what that means is that that's been lying there, basically, for 50 years, known by various governments. I'm not just blaming one government. I always seem to get into that position. I'm not. It's been avoided. But it's this government that has the opportunity of doing something about it. It's been in power since 2011. There was a upper house inquiry that gave it the green light of how to do it. And now at the very last moment, how do we delay it past March of next year? Big bunker, concrete bunker. Well, it doesn't pass the pub test. It certainly doesn't pass the test. And I'm only speaking for myself, not speaking for any groups or people or anything else. Just that this community shouldn't have this foisted upon it either by the government saying, we're going to give you 7 to 9 Nelson Parade as a park. So you can monitor it for the next 100 years or 50 years, then fix it up when it decays and monitor the rayon gas coming out over the kids playing. I mean, it's a nonsense, frankly, and it's a disgrace. And it will lead, if it's not, this site is not cleaned up by this government before March of next year, then they will face a community fight every day up until the election, showing what a disgraceful and despicable act they are doing and not taking action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Just, would you stay with us just a moment, please? Councillors, any questions? Any comments? Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you.
The last speaker you have is Mr. Quinn. Thank you, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I remind you, Mr. Quinn, you have 3 minutes.
You sure can. I won't take 3 minutes. Well, councillors, as you're aware, 2018 marks 52 years since contamination was found on the Nelson Parade site. September 2017 marked the 9th anniversary of the 2008 parliamentary inquiry into the site, and that inquiry made 12 recommendations relating to remediation of the site. In its March 2009 response to those recommendations, the New South Wales Government agreed to undertake remediation of the site. However, since 2009, successive New South Wales governments, including the current government, have done little to address or resolve this serious, ongoing environmental issue. In November 2014, the Environmental Protection Authority issued the management order that we're all aware of. To date, the New South Wales Government has failed to comply with that management order issued by the EPA in 2014. The current remediation plan, the one that is still with the government, documented, proposes that all contaminated material is removed and disposed of at an appropriately licensed facility. Now, based on previous commitments from the New South Wales Government, this council and our residents have acted in good faith and have assumed that the government was committed to this position, as announced on the 21st of February 2012 by the then Finance Minister, the Honourable Greg Pearce, and subsequently reaffirmed by the former Finance Minister and current Treasurer, the Honourable Dominic Perrottet. I can table here now copies of the correspondence received from Minister Perrottet through our local member Anthony Roberts regarding that commitment. I think you've all seen those, but I'll put them on the table again. Now, councillors, the current status and procrastination in resolving this issue has little to do with environmental science, expert reports, and the recommendations of the inquiry. This issue is about the lack of political will to make the right decision for our residents, some of whom live within just 20 metres of this site. The member for Mulgoa and former Penrith City Councillor, current Minister the Honourable Tanya Davies, has made this a political issue since her election campaign in 2011. This issue is about a deliberate and calculated and subsequent policy decision by members of the New South Wales Coalition Cabinet to save the marginal seat of Mulgoa, in which the Kemps Creek licence facility currently lies. This facility today and every day receives and processes waste of similar contamination, including, I might add, waste from overseas. I'm aware, for example, that there is waste coming, for example, from Papua New Guinea to the facility at Kemps Creek. Councillors, I've printed off here 2 Google Maps. Aerial views, they're both to the same scale, one of the Kemps Creek site, the other of Hunters Hill. And it's worth comparing, I'll just hang on to 2 of them if I may, it's worth comparing the land volume that we're talking about of the Kemps Creek facility, for example, and the Hunters Hill Woolwich area. The Kemps Creek facility, if you overlay them, would go from approximately Margaret Street all the way back to Vernon Street, if not further beyond. So we're talking about a very large area of site out at Kemps Creek, which is a very long way from any residential properties. Councillors, my question to you tonight is, are you going to support the political decision to save the coalition seat of Mulgoa, which in reality has no health or other impacts on immediate residents in that area? Or are you going to continue to support our residents and families who, if any of these proposals proceed, will forever live within metres of the on-site low-level waste that Kemps Creek or another facility is licensed to take? That's the question I ask you to consider tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Mr. Quinn, may I have a copy of your presentation too for our records? Thank you. Council, is there any questions of Mr. Quinn? Thank you very much to the speakers. Councillor Miles.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion.
You'd like to move the motion?
A motion, not the motion, as read in the business paper. I'd like to move a motion that, number 1, the report is received and noted. Number 2, the council reaffirms its position that the site at 7, 9 and 11 Nelson Parade should be fully remediated in accordance with the current application before the Minister. That 3, to allow for a reasonable evaluation of any site encapsulation options that may be proposed, the Property New South Wales provide a response to the questions proposed by the Hunters Hill Environmental Action Group as soon as possible. That number 4, Property New South Wales provide council with indicative plans for any potential on-site encapsulation options that might be pursued as soon as possible, together with appropriate planning and environmental advice with respect to the proposal. And that 5, that council take all reasonable steps to keep the community informed of any updates relating to this issue and take a leadership role in advocating the community's preferred outcomes.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. We have a seconder, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Miles.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this is, as I think we are all aware, a long-run issue. We have, in the last year and in my term on council, dealt with this a number of times. Every time we seem as though we're getting close to some sort of resolution here, it escapes our grasp again. I'm not necessarily, without having seen any formal proposal by the government, going to say that this is an option that we will discount entirely. But as the residents and the local action groups have said tonight, we don't have any of that information. So it would seem to me that the most reasonable way forward is to reaffirm our commitment, which is ongoing as far as I'm concerned, to a full remediation of the site with the contaminants being taken off of what is a residential street, and that if there are other options, they are brought to the community and to council in a consultative manner and in a formal way. I've heard options tonight that says that we're going to encapsulate the waste material, but take some away, that we're going to encapsulate all the material And as Councillor Williams has pointed out, does encapsulation mean remediation? We don't really know. So it would seem to me that the best course of action as a council is that we reaffirm our commitment to a full remediation of the site, that if proposals do come to us, that they are made formal and made to both the community through Property New South Wales Department of Planning and the Department of Environment, and to council. So it would seem only reasonable that if there is some alternative option, that it is brought to us formally and not proposed to residents in these interactions without having any real concrete substantiation around the issue. So I'd like to reaffirm Council's commitment to a full remediation, and as Mr Atkins pointed out, that we should, moving forward, take a leadership position on advocating preferred outcomes for the community, but also if there are different proposals, that we can look at those in more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Would you like to speak against Councillor Miles?
I'd like to move an amendment, Mr Mayor.
Like to move an amendment?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd like to add an extra point which may or may not get the agreement of the mover of the motion. But I'd like to add council seek legal advice as to obtain, as to its obligation to maintain notification on section 10.7 certificates, which is the old 1.9 certificates, advising of contamination in the near vicinity. We've heard tonight that that does currently take place. Does encapsulation remove our legal obligation in that regard? So that's what I'd like.
Happy to accept that.
Accept that as incorporate that in your motion.
I'd also foreshadow, and I don't want to, well, I'd like to go one step further, and I'd like to reject the recent proposal of encapsulating the material on site, as it is not compatible with residential or parkland areas, conflicts with intergenerational equity, and provides a high risk exposure to council through maintenance monitoring and refurbishment at a later time.
All right.
I don't know whether the mover would accept that as part of the motion, because it's a bit contrary to what his point is, but I'd be speaking for that.
All right, so you're foreshadowing that. So
Unless
this is to reject.
the mover wishes to include that as an amendment.
Probably not, Mr Mayor, only insofar as I said, if there are alternative proposals being put forward that without accepting them blindly, I'd like to see some detail. If there are alternative proposals, and I think we're all agreed that the best outcome for the residents and our stated position is a full remediation of the site. But if there is alternatives that may provide some benefit, I'd like to at least see them and consider them. It doesn't mean we need to accept them. And I think that most of us around the table probably at this stage wouldn't. But I'd like to see them.
All right. Against, anybody like to speak against? Anybody for? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I support Councillor Miles' views in relation to this wholeheartedly. I think this is a issue that has gone on, as we've heard tonight, for far too long. If this was private land, the government would force you to move it out tomorrow. And by only moving 5 barrels of 100 significant radioactive waste from the site, what is being achieved by moving 5 barrels? The other 95 stay on site. 4,000 tonne is going to stay on site out of 5,000. No one can really give us answers as to what are, there's 3 levels of waste on the site. What are the volumes of each of those waste levels? We get conflicting information all the time. The government, as Mr Jenkins has said, seems to be using this as a process to delay remediation of the site. And in my view, I'm a professional in this area, remediation means resolving the issue and not leaving intergenerational issues. Encapsulation does and provides risk to the community on site. The only viable outcome, in my view, is to remove the material off-site, as we've heard, and we've heard many, many times, this has been considered over and over again, and the solution is removal of the waste in total to a lawful disposal location. There's been a report and a proposal put on the table to take that to such a location. It is now being delayed by the Minister, and that now leaves the residents in limbo yet again. And this charade of encapsulation, I believe, from a personal and professional viewpoint, will not resolve the issue for those residents. That stigma will be maintained. It will be highlighted because it now will be in a concrete bunker. They will, I haven't heard to the contrary, but I believe it'll have to be vented. So you still will get radon gas, probably in a much more concentrated fashion than its dispersed nature in the soil. And if we have a park, there'll be kids and people playing right alongside on top of that facility. Nobody in their right mind would say that that is a final solution. Concrete does decay. You might get 50 years out of it, you might get 100 years out of it, but it is on the foreshore or near the harbour. The salt will actually reduce the lifespan of that facility. So it will have to be revisited if they go down that path. I don't believe it's a viable nor a genuine offer by the government. I think it's just a delaying tactic, and I think council has taken the appropriate steps in the past to support the residents, and I think we should continue that process wholeheartedly so that we can get relief for our residents and get this issue resolved once and for all. So I support the motion, and I think that from my personal view, and I say from a professional view as well, being somebody that's worked in the waste industry for many years and dealt with contaminated soil, encapsulation solves nothing.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think there's anybody who wants to speak against this, is there? No. Am I correct? So I'd like to thank Councillor Miles for his motion. I think it gives us an opportunity to gather more information from the government. I support the first part of it, that it needs to be totally remediated, and I think when we get the other information, we've got it fully and we really understand it, I don't think the residents will be for it. I'd also say to you, this goes far wider than the Nelson Parade. It extends out to the 500 metre line the government talked about recently, and we have people on the other side of the bridge who are also very unhappy to have this in their area. So I think it's a big issue from a lot more people than just the local, but it's a major issue for the people in Nelson Parade, clearly. So I think we can get the other information as quickly as possible. I have a feeling we'll revert back to complete removal of the materials. That would be my guess, but I'd like to hear more from the residents so we're sure that we're doing what they would like. It's very important to me. So if there's no further comments, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Councillor. It's a good decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers.
Thank you, everyone.
So, any question that she's doing there?
Resumption of
We'll go ahead and do the order.
resumption of standing order.
We'd, I'm thinking we should perhaps bring the Happy
I was
Hands.
going to move that. Move the Happy Hands.
I am quite worried.
I'm happy.
Councillor Miles.
Oh,
Can we move? Yes, happy hands.
yes, Happy Hands.
You wanted to bring forward?
Yes, I'll move.
Seconded by Elizabeth.
Oh, second.
Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Miles.
Hold on a moment, Mr. Mayor.
Do we have the speaker?
Yes, we do.
She's happy.
Councillor Miles.
We have a speaker. You have a speaker.
Oh, sorry, we have a speaker. Ms. Paxton, please.
Good evening.
evening, everyone.
You have,
It's
you
still
have 3
involves
minutes.
soil though.
It's soil. Hopefully, we're creating better soil. My name is Emma Paxton. Helen Kirkman and Nicole Miranda with me. Together, we're the Happy Hens Social Enterprise, incorporated in 2016. Our backgrounds are quite varied in nursing, accounting, graphic design, plus expertise in horticulture, aged care, community events and projects with school PNCs in the greater community, and of course gardening. Our overlying passion is to bring all community members who wish to participate together. We began the Bethlehem Bay Community Garden in June 2017 with land assistance from National Parks and Wildlife and financial support from Hunters Hill Council. With hard work weekly from our core group, plus weekend working bees with community, the garden has thrived for all to enjoy, and we were very excited to receive the Hunters Hill Council Achievers Award for the Bethlehem Bay project this January. Requests from locals tell us that Bethlehem Bay Community Garden is no longer big enough for the needs of Hunters Hill residents and its surrounds. We have over 150 willing community members in our database. However, in a small space that can only operate on Friday mornings, we cannot get full participation on that project. Some people can naturally only attend weekend sessions as they work full-time. Many of these are in apartment buildings with no access to green space, so we're very keen to get outside and help in the production of edibles whilst being social. While we'd still continue to manage Bethlehem Bay, we're keen to involve as many people as we can, which brings us to Henley Bowling Green. Henley offers more opportunities given its size and topography, allowing all community members to participate with full access for people who are less mobile. A no-dig community garden on half of one green will allow anyone who would like to participate to do so. With the use of the greenkeeper's shed, we would have shelter and storage. We hope to involve children in our area, such as the Riverside Preschool next door to the bowling green, whose director has already expressed a keen interest for the kids to be part of that project from the start, and as has the local primary and high schools in the area. Aged care residents will be welcomed as we hope for intergenerational learning also. The safety of all our volunteers is of the largest importance to us, so all cover insurance will be held by the Happy Hens. Financially, we hope for a start-up grant from environmental businesses, and also fundraisers will be held from the start to involve locals in the ownership of the garden and to build a sense of community. We believe we're in a good position to assist council and benefit community with this project using our experience from Bethlehem Bay. Our personal gain will be to see it come to fruition and the enjoyment of the participants in this beautiful outdoor location. We hope you would all like to see that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that was exactly 3 minutes.
Wow.
Councillors. Councillor Miles. Sorry, Councillor Miles.
Question to you, Mr. Mayor. Emma, how's the Happy Hens going to manage the time between the two facilities? Is it going to be in tandem, or is it going to be done?
We are not 100% sure as yet, but we think hopefully one will just evolve to, from Bethlehem Bay to Henley if we get that chance. So we'll continue. We do Friday mornings at this stage, but we'll have to increase to weekends as well. So once we come up with hours on the weekend, or choose some hours that suit most people, we'd probably divide it that way to start with, I think.
Councillor Williams.
I'm fully supportive of this as an initiative in the community, but I need to ask the question. As a temporary facility, council may have other plans for that location in the maybe near to distant mid future. How would you feel if council wasn't to proceed with that location? We'd probably try and help you find somewhere else, but that area might be utilised for other purposes in the future. Sure. I'm not quite sure what that might be, but in our strategic planning processes, we're looking at opportunities for that site.
Yeah,
so I know you wanted it for 2 years, but I was just wondering
how
you feel about the temporary nature of it all.
Oh, it's okay. It's good. It's a start. So we're happy to just get in and do what we can with those 2 years, if it is 2 years. We'd be upset, no doubt. If it came to an end, we'd have to pack it all up and take it, hopefully, somewhere else. But
Well, we may
It's
be
okay.
able to assist in that if that did come about.
no, that's okay.
But as you can
We're
imagine,
prepared.
that's.
Or incorporate it.
Yeah, that's well, you could, yes. Yeah, you could do that.
We are prepared to move. Sad, but prepared.
Are there any other questions, councillors?
May not happen.
Any further questions? Councillor Sanderson? Any
Mr.
questions of the Speaker?
Oh, sorry. Question first. What sort of workforce do you have to operate these facilities?
We've run a few working bees on the weekends, so we've got probably about 150 people that are willing to get out and do working bees at this point. But I suppose if we had this change in property, we would advertise for more people to come in and volunteer. So we've got us all the time, and then on top of that, probably another 10 very, pretty regular people, and others at the ready.
And the majority of the produce you produce, how's that distributed?
At the moment, we don't really have a lot. We don't get enough out of it. It's such a small little plot. So basically, we whoever comes and helps gets to take some home with them. So that's that size of it. But we would work out something a little bit more, of a larger scale if we had that larger piece of land.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions of the Speaker? Thank you, Ms. Paxton.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that the recommendation be in a slightly amended form. As Councillor Williams has already said, there is some justification for concern over the future use of the land. People have a copy of that motion. How it agreed would be that subject to the outcome of public consultation required at point 2 below, council will use or allow usage of the Western Green and associated storage building at Henley Community Centre by the Happy Hens Social Enterprise Inc. As outlined in the proposal for an initial period of 12 months at no charge, on the understanding that this arrangement is not a lease and that after this initial period council may give 6 months notice to vacate the site. 2, that the proposed use by Happy Hen Society Enterprise Inc. be advertised as required under section 356 of the Local Government Act, and the advertisement invites submissions to council about the merits of this proposal. The remaining part of the motion will be as it is in the recommendation. So that's what I would like to move.
Thank you. Have a seconded. Councillor Williams seconded. Councillor Sanderson, would you like to speak to that?
Look, I think I'm very supportive of the initiative, as I think all councillors are. We're also very conscious of the fact that there is potential for other uses of the facility at Henley, and I think the motion as it is would give you 18 months to get established, and then there'd be 6 months notice minimum. I'd be happy if other councillors have got other ideas in terms of those notice periods, but I think it's important to emphasise that this is not a lease. I was a bit concerned that the report talked about it being a lease, because the lease gives rights far beyond those of some sort of licence agreement. I'd be happy to accept amendments on the duration of those notices, but I'm very supportive of this proposal, and I'll commend the motion.
Yeah, is there anybody who would like to speak against? Councillor Miles.
Only insofar as the original motion as proposed for the 2 years, I think that a hen in the hand is worth two in the bush, if I can use that phrase. I think that were Henley Community Centre to be planned for other uses, that is going to take some time. And I think we've heard, and I think that we are all aware enough of the Happy Hens to know that I think they would be involved in that process and would be happy if council were to need the facility, that they would vacate the premises and we would try and find some other facility for them. I don't think perhaps lease was the wrong word, and perhaps it should be a license agreement or something with alternative arrangements. But I think that the 2-year period didn't concern me particularly, because were an adaptive use to be applied to the Henley Community Centre, it's going to take some time, and I think 2 years is probably an appropriate amount of time for that to happen. The demolition clause, or whatever you want to call it, of the 6 months, I didn't see it as that transactional. We're dealing with a community organisation here, so I think we're all in favour of giving them the facility, but I think that equally we're dealing with a community garden, so we should be a little less caught up with the rules here. If it is a licence rather than a lease, I'm happy with that, but I think that giving them 1 year, that's in terms of a community garden, 1 season, which doesn't really even establish the garden properly. So I would be, my preferred option would be for 2 years, and if we want to call it a licence agreement or something rather than a lease, I'm happy for that, but I'd like to keep that 2 years in there for the community group. So if I could either foreshadow that motion or perhaps suggest the amendment.
As I said, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to accept amendments.
Very good.
In terms of the duration.
So could I just check, Councillor Miles, are you happy with the motion which is on the table as amended motion?
Yes.
Or the motion rather, excuse me, but with 2 years instead of
24 months rather than 12.
And all other things to remain the same
Yes.
as per the amendment.
So you're saying an initial period of 2 years at no charge, on the understanding this arrangement is not a lease, and that after the initial period, council may give 6 months notice?
So it takes out those, could you clarify that, Councillor?
Well, I was actually going to propose an amendment
the
myself, which I might just float for around the table. Obviously, we agree with this. We think it's a fantastic initiative and support it totally. Perhaps for an initial period of 12 months with a review for further 12 months at the end of the initial 12 months, so that we just keep the ball rolling.
Okay, so that takes us back to 12 months instead of 18 months, and then with a possibility
Well, it was never
of 2
18
years.
months. It was.
Well, it's this gives an initial period of 6 months to vacate the site, so that's 18 months.
I mean, my preference is we just give them the straight 2 years. But if we are worried about, wanting to do something with Henley at some point, then we give initial 12 months, and then we review our position in a year's time. And if nothing is happening, then we just continue with the arrangement for another 12 months and continue on in that way, moving forward.
All right, there's thank you, Councillor. I think there's lots of different ways we can do this, but my guess is it takes 2 years to get a community garden up and going. I think you've got the first 6 months of organisation and 6 months of plantings and another 12 months to see the seasons run through. So I'd support Councillor Miles' view that we, if I may, that we need 2 years in this. And I think that would be the sensible way to go. But so I'm speaking for Councillor Miles, unless of course you want to move that motion that you've just put, Councillor McLaughlin.
No, I agree with Councillor Miles as well. I'm just trying to get a mechanism whereby we can review the process.
I've just asked the General Manager, perhaps he could simplify this for us.
Yes, I think I can, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, we did use the term lease, but that wasn't the intent. It's just a normal hirer. It's just a hirer like anybody else who will come and use it, and the proposal is that we waive the hire fees. But to waive the hire fees, you need to seek public comment first. So the original recommendation was we allow their usage, trial basis for 2 years, We advertise the fact that we're going to waive the fees, we seek public comment. If the comment comes back and it's all positive, then we tell you that. If it doesn't, away we go, and 3 and 4 as is. So I think we've just unnecessarily complicated things here, but I do agree with Councillor Sanderson. You may, I think, rather than on a trial basis for 2 years, 1 year, it could be 1 year with a 1 year extension, or it could be 2 years with a review after the first year, or something like that.
Councillor Miles.
Mr. Mayor, I think that if we are treating this as instead of a lease as a hire, then 2 years is something that we should be comfortable with, because if we do move forward with some proposal for the Henley Club, then we're just going to have to enter into that dialogue, and I think the ladies are happy with that. So I'm asking Councillor Sanderson, are you happy with the 2 years, or?
Well, I have, but the only thing is that 2 years effectively becomes 2.5 years if we stick with the wording of my motion.
Well,
so,
let's just take it out then.
So if we go for 18 months and then 6 months notice, then we get the 2 years.
Why don't we perhaps? I think we're getting caught up in semantics here.
Why can't you give?
Why don't we put the word hire in there instead of lease, which will satisfy any confusion in relation to what the facility is being used for.
The lease isn't in there anyway.
It isn't in there anyway.
Right.
It's in there.
It's just not a lease.
I'm not in this one.
But it refers back. The document refers back to or the motion refers back to the report in which the term lease has been used. So I just want to make.
But the recommendation makes
it is not a lease.
Yes, but the recommendation makes no reference to a lease. The original recommendation, it simply is a hire.
In the introduction. Oh,
Right.
yeah, okay.
So, would you like to have any further discussion on this matter? Anybody else like to speak against?
No.
For?
Quick
Council.
question.
Question?
Just a question. There's with the lease or hire, there's not going to be any land tax issues with that.
I don't believe so, because they're not making a profit. It's not a profit making. I think it's a not-for-profit.
Okay. Cool.
Volunteer driven. But I'm now confused. What is the motion?
Yes, that's what I was just about to
ask. What's the motion? Is it
2 years.
Sanderson?
We're giving them 2 years, I believe.
Councillor Sanderson, can you clarify?
Or are we just going for the original recommendation?
Yeah, the original. No. Councillor Sanderson has a motion.
Well, he's got a motion on the floor.
Councillor Sanderson, could you enlighten us?
Could I read the motion as I accept it?
Yes, please.
Councillor Miles to extend it to 2 years, but subject to the outcome of public consultation required at point 2 below, Council allow use of the Western Green and associated storage building at Henley Community Centre by the Happy Hens Social Enterprise Inc. as outlined in the proposal for an initial period, and to be consistent with the 2 years, we'll say of 18 months at no charge, on the understanding this arrangement is not a lease, and that after a period of after an initial period, council may give 6 months' notice to vacate the site. 2, that the proposed use by the Hens Social Enterprise Inc. Be advertised as required under section 356 of the Local Government Act, and that the advertisement invites submissions to council about the merits of the proposal. Then 3 and 4 would remain as the recommendation, and there is a clarification, as I have read there, that we are asking for submissions, where the way it was originally drafted, we weren't inviting submissions.
Councillor Miles, do you have any questions related to that? So, Councillor Sanderson, that's your motion?
That's my motion as of.
I'll put the motion.
No, I would like to make.
Do you have a question?
No, I'd like to speak.
Have you spoken?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Please, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to support the motion, but in doing so, also state my support for the concept and what was being proposed here. But I believe as a council we need to be transparent with the community. The community will see in our community strategic plan possibility of something happening at that site. So I think we need to be upfront and transparent and say, well, that facility is available at the moment, but council may have other plans for it later on. That doesn't preclude the opportunity for us to incorporate the garden in any subsequent planning, but we need to be very clear and transparent that this may not be a long-term solution.
Sure.
But something that is very valuable and something that we need to get going and initiate. And I'm sure when and if changes happen there, that we either can get it incorporated or help find an alternative location. But I think we need to be very transparent and upfront with the community as to what that site is and its potential into the future.
Thank you. So we need to distribute that information widely so it's understood. Is that what you're suggesting?
Sorry?
We need to distribute that piece of information widely so it's understood in the community.
Mr Mayor, that's part of the, as I understand it, the process of the community strategic plan, which is now out on advertisement.
Yes.
And that's why I think we just needed to make that comment tonight,
right,
so that there's no confusion and people don't have expectations that may be changed later on.
But the fact that we're allowing the Happy Hens there for 2 years,
yes,
or 18 months plus 6 months, we need to share that information.
It has to go out to community
Because I don't think that's in.
Consultation.
That's right.
Yes, part of
That's
that.
what you're suggesting.
Well, it's, part
It's
of
in the
motion, yeah.
motion.
Yes.
Yeah. The only
I was
point
just
I'm
trying to work out
making
what you were
is-
speaking to and what point you were making.
Well, the point I'm making is that in our community strategic plan, there is provision for
Yes.
considering development of different sites
Yes.
or change of use of different council facilities.
Yes.
That is one that is mentioned.
Yes.
And we're entering into arrangement with the community group, and all I'm saying is that we need to be consistent and let them know that there may be a change happening in that location.
Yes.
And we're happy to support them until and if that happens. And any subsequent actions that are taken at that location, we would endeavour to either incorporate in any change of land use or whatever, or if not, endeavour to find them another location.
Right.
But I think we would be not being totally upfront unless we put on the table that there may be a change into the future, so people can have the appropriate expectations
Good.
and
Thank
not
you.
disappointed down the track.
It's good to have that on the record. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Well done. Look forward to seeing the garden. Thank you.
Resumption of standing orders.
Second.
Councillor Williams?
Resumption as well.
Resumption of standing orders.
It will move.
Yeah, I think
We don't actually need to do that anymore.
You wanna
What we
bring-
need to do is we bring an item forward. We're allowed to do that.
Yep.
Then we go back into the normal thing.
So
But
we're
I think
back to
there's,
3.1.
I think there's another item we need to bring forward, isn't there?
There is.
The matter of the library.
We have some representatives.
So,
5.2.
so
it's not
Seed,
now,
seed
is it?
funding.
Oh, seed funding.
No, he wants to go to
No.
the library.
could we have some people who want to speak to
Oh,
the library? Perhaps
yep.
if somebody might
I'll
bring
move-
that
move
forward.
library
Councillor
forward.
Miles, Councillor Williams, thank you very much.
No speakers.
Okay, we have no speakers on the item. Councillor Williams,
I'd like to move the motion, Mr Mayor, if I may.
please.
I'll move that the report be received and noted. Number 2, the staff from both Huntersville and Ryde councils be thanked for their efforts in compiling the data in the comprehensive report. Point 3, the council renegotiate with the City of Ryde the agreement to include provision for Huntersville to be given equity in the assets acquired as part of the library service past and future. An annual increase reduction based on rate pegging decisions, not the current approximate increase in the agreement. Rate pegging is about 2.3, but if you look at the agreement, the increase each year is 10%. So I think that's inequitable and that needs to be renegotiated. And then we go on part C of the renegotiation, and we go on a 12-month rolling basis rather than a fixed term agreement. Item 4, Council continue to develop alternative best practice approaches to providing libraries throughout learning space services through the discussion with surrounding councils and in the longer term through the utilisation of developer contributions, possibly acquiring the Gladesville Library site via land swap with the adjacent Baby Health Centre and or adaptive uses of our existing facilities.
Do you have copies of that to share with the other councillors?
I don't, Mr Mayor, but I can give the General Manager this copy, if that helps.
Thanks. So it's quite an elaborate motion, and I'm not sure that
we can get copies made.
Yes, I think we might do that and just stop for a moment while we get the copies and have a good look at it.
Well, I'm not making a decision until September anyway, so.
Where's the 10% come from? In the Schedule 2 in the lease agreement, what's it? It states a set amount of increase per year, and it's currently set at $60,000, which is 10% of the cost. But the report talks about rate peaking being a reasonable increment. So we're paying 3 times what we should in incremental change.
We might just wait a moment till we get back with everything.
I was just answering a question.
It's being recorded, and it might be hard to pick up if we're not talking directly to it.
Are we suspended? We're suspended.
We're suspended just for the moment, but let's not carry on the discussion until we get back into it. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, councillors, could you just take a moment to read through that? So to be clear for the recording, the motion we're reading has just been read by Councillor Williams. I do have a seconder, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd like to put on the record and make it very clear that this motion has nothing to do with closing libraries or reducing communities' access to libraries. But what it does do is, on several levels, bring into focus what's in the lease agreement and in the report that is before us. I again reiterate, and I attended the recent Gladesville library committee meeting, and the effort put in by RIDE Council staff and our own staff in preparing the report and compiling the information was extensive and comprehensive, and I do appreciate that effort. Getting on to the nitty-gritty of how the relationship between RIDE and Hunters Hill continue, there seems to be a very skewed basis on the agreement as it currently stands. And there's three issues that I've picked up from the reports that are in front of us, and three issues, there may be more. I'm sure there are if we have more time to look into it. But from my observation in the renegotiation of any agreement with RIDE, then in Part A, I talk about the provision of council to have an equitable share in the assets accumulated through the relationship. I would guess over the last 61 years or whatever the agreement is, this council and this community has contributed $20-30 million to the RIDE library service. We have nothing to show for it, not a book, not a computer, nothing. It seems to be all skewed totally to RIDE, and our money seems to, although provide an excellent service, we're not building any capital out of that relationship. Another disturbing issue in relation to the agreement is the way that the annual increase is structured in Schedule 2. A fair increase would be rate pegging or thereabouts, and I think that's referred to in part of the documentation. But the actual increase per year is 10%, which is 3 times what would be a fair increase in that relationship. So I think that needs to be revisited and discussed through any continuation of the agreement. The third thing is, in relation to the renegotiation, that we put it on a 12-month rolling basis rather than a fixed 5 or 10-year program. The fourth part of the motion is something that, again, I don't think it should have any element of concern or doubt in the community's mind. We're about getting, or I'm about getting, best practice approaches to library services. We've seen in detail what RIDE offer, which is an excellent service and one that is utilised by our community. We haven't explored our involvement with Lane Cove or Canada Bay in terms of numbers. I would imagine there's quite a number of residents that have library cards in those areas. The other aspect is that as we move forward with developments and developer contributions, then we may be able to identify ways of providing a library service for our community equal, if not superior, to what's being offered at the moment. Item 4 or point 4 is about finding, exploring the future and maintaining our interest in getting that best practice available to us. So there's 3 parts to the motion which I think are important, that in the relationship with RIDE that we talk about and be open with.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Would anybody like to speak against the motion?
I'm not going to speak against the motion.
Councillor Miles.
Mr Mayor, I just perhaps before I speak to the motion, one way or another, would like to get some clarifications and questions.
Please go ahead.
When Councillor Williams says in his motion here, Hunters Hill's to be given equity in assets acquired as part of the library service, that is presumably pertaining to the computers, the books, the property. What does that mean to you?
Real property?
Yes.
Mr Mayor, it means to me that there's a range of assets that are acquired through the relationship. Those assets, some of them are obvious, which are books, computers, desks, shelves, and I guess you could extend it as far as the building at Gladesville. I'm open to that discussion, but I think in the first instance we need to put on the table that we should have some equity in the capital that's grown through our investment in the library service.
And when you talk about a land swap with the adjacent baby health centre, what is your thinking there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is a bit of a thought bubble, I agree. But if we were to acquire that library, which is appropriate size based on the report for a council of our size, do a land swap, then as we move forward into the future, we could have a facility that could migrate into an appropriate facility that comes out of a developer contribution or through other adaptive uses of facilities. So I'm quite happy to take that out, but that was just a concept of looking at things a bit differently, that if we wanted to internalise the library service, we could immediately negotiate, if Ryde was willing, there's two parcels of land side by side, swap them, we get access to that, and as we move forward, if we do find other opportunities to house our library, then we can make that transition. That is a future thing, just an option.
And while you're standing, Councillor, the removal of Iris and the undertaking of community consultation for the library service, is that a money saving initiative? Is it what's the thought process there?
I don't think we're in a position at the moment to go to the community to seek their views, because what we are doing is continuing on with the service, but in the relationship. But we want that relationship more solidly based in a fair way, our way. We may do a survey later on, and that may come if we want to change locations or do something innovative. But at the moment, we're bound into this agreement, and we don't have an alternative to that. It's a good service, but I don't think it's equitable in the relationship. So I think the Iris thing may flow in the future, but I'm not talking about disrupting our current service at the moment.
Any further questions? I have a question, if I could. Are you suggesting that you would be willing to delete the words after contribution in point 4? Are you willing to do that now, or would you like to?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As I say, I just put that in as an additional concept. It's not essential to the motion because that's something a long way out.
So will you withdraw that part?
I could delete. Yes, I'm happy to delete that.
So who would like to speak against the motion? Councillor Cole.
Not against. I just want a bit of clarification on the equity in the assets.
So question? Question of Councillor Williams?
Yeah, how that would work.
Councillor Williams.
I'm not a financial person, so I've got no idea how that would work. But I think it's a fair and reasonable proposition to put on the negotiation table. At the moment, we get nothing except a library service for the large investment that we make each year. I would have thought in any relationship that's equitable, fair, and negotiated, that both parties get something out of it. And I see that issue of Ryde accumulating a whole lot of assets where we get nothing is not an equitable outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further questions?
No, Mr. Mayor.
No further questions? Would you like to speak against the motion? Councillor Miles.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move that we defer this to another meeting. I spoke about this last council meeting, and I just feel like we're doing this on the run, and that probably a little bit more thought needs to go into what we want to gain out of a renegotiation. I agree the equity there is not on par. I've been banging on about that for 5 years now, and I think that some of the ideas outlined in the motion have merit, and some of them probably need to be tidied up a little bit. But I think that as a council, we probably need to sit down and have that discussion prior to adopting a policy that means that the staff enter into negotiations with the City of Ryde, because there's things in this motion that have merit, but probably need some clarification, assets being one of them. I think that the rate pegging is an interesting point, but probably needs some more investigation. It's much more equitable than what we've had so far. And when we entered into the agreement in the last term of council, I was a little bit flabbergasted at the size of the increase that we were paying each year. And as you say, that's not something that we are billing. We're not getting any equity out of that. We're getting a good service by all accounts, and the staff have done a really good job compiling this, but we're not getting equity. So I agree with a lot of what's in the motion here, but I think we're doing this on the fly, and we need to think about this a bit more seriously before we adopt a policy.
Thank you. So could I clarify? You're moving a motion. Do we defer this?
Yes.
Foreshadowing that motion.
Is it a new motion that we... alternate motion that we...
Yes, I think that if it were this motion to be voted down...
So do you foreshadowing, or do you want to move the motion we defer?
I'd like to move the motion that is deferred.
It's an amendment.
I'll defer the motion.
It's a motion to defer.
Motion to defer, yeah.
All right. Seconded, Councillor Crassley. Who would like to speak for that?
Again, I'm not saying that there's not merit in what is being proposed. I think that this is...
Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Williams.
There's already a motion on the table which I put and was seconded. I haven't withdrawn that motion. So how are we now on to a totally different motion?
We've got an alternate motion to
But you must deal with the motion before council, before you go to an alternate.
We could do that if you like.
Well, I think it's polite.
We could do that if you like.
Proper.
I'm happy to put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's lost. Councillor Miles.
Mr Mayor, as I said, I didn't want what Councillor Williams has constructed into his motion to go out the window. I think that we can use components of what have been suggested here and move forward with them. I just think, and again, I've expressed this before, tabling motions on the night where we have not had the time to consider. There's some good points in here, but I haven't been able to digest what that's going to look like. In a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and the library service agreement is taking up that span of time, and it is obviously something that we're interested in planning longer term for. So, without discrediting the things that have been proposed, I think we just need to have a bit more time to digest and have a think about what it is that we want to get out of this library service agreement. As I said, the staff have done a really good job compiling the data here. We've had time to look at the data and go through what it is that we're getting for our buck. I agree with some of the points in here, but and that we have a good service at the moment. It can be improved, and that forms part of the discussion as well. So this motion, or the motion now that is published in the business paper, I think can be expanded perhaps via a council workshop in between now and the next council meeting when this is considered, because I think we all have something to contribute to that libraries, what we want to see as councillors happen to the library in Gladesville, and I think that we're all committed to providing a library service, but what that looks like moving into the future is what we're trying to hone down into up to that September period where we need to renegotiate.
Thank you, Councillor. So is there anybody who'd like to speak against deferring the motion? Deferring the item. Excuse me. Deferring the item. All right. Can I put the motion? Who'd like to speak for?
I'll speak for the deferral, just coming up quickly.
Just obviously there's an issue we need to consider. I think it's about the ramifications of not making decisions tonight. General Manager.
What was the question?
Is there something we need to consider before we vote on this?
Mrs. Kelly was just concerned that if the council did wish to go ahead with the consultation suggested in the report, if we defer that for too long, we won't have time to get that done before we have to review the agreement. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I'm going to move quickly on. So you'd like to speak for the deferment?
I do like to speak for the deferment, but I also agree that I don't think we need consultation at this point. So I think maybe the rest of the councillors are feeling that way as well, if that's an issue.
Saves us some money.
Yes. I just wanted to also say to Margaret Kelly and to the members of Gladesville Library that there was a lot of work put into this report, and it is a very good report. It's actually a very compelling report. It convinced me that we have a very good service arrangement with Ryde Library. That's not to say that it can't be improved. Just pulling up on the points that we do have the lowest expenditure contribution of most of the Northern Region councils on this issue. But I do agree that some of the points that Councillor Miles has raised, Councillor Williams has raised, do need to be examined. I am calling for the deferment because I just don't see how we can enter into negotiations where you can't at this point quantify the equity in those assets for the past, and I just find that all very confusing. That will require quite a lot of work. I agree with the rate pegging. I think that's actually a very good point. As far as point 4 goes, I absolutely agree we need to look at alternative centralised locations for the library, hopefully on one of our own assets at some point, and whether we do that through developer contributions or other arrangements, then I think that needs to be examined as well. The other point I did want to make is I think we all agree that at this point further consultation is not required. The report says that we have an option to take this to a referendum if we need to. I think we could possibly consider doing the community consultation if we wanted to do that at a later date. I don't think anyone wants to get rid of a library service. I don't think it's absolutely essential that we have a library service. Every council does. It's part of the bread and butter of what we do. It's part of the roads, rates and rubbish component of all of those things that councils provide. I think the Ryde service is a very good one, but I do agree that there is a little bit of lack of disparity between some of the relationships that we're getting out of it. So I defer for further consultation on it.
Anybody wishing to speak against?
No, I'm agreeing with.
No.
Any questions? Can I put the motion to defer? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. So we move back to the correct order that we were in. I think we go to 3.1. Seed funding for inclusive playground at Gronia Park. Councillors, I'm in your hands. Moved Councillor Collins.
With an amendment.
Moved Councillor Collins with an amendment. So what is the amendment you'd like to make?
As recommended by the General Manager.
I'm sorry.
That we would add part 3 to the
Thank you.
motion that we would require, if the councillors are in mind to support the proposal, that would be advertised under section 356 and public submissions invited.
Could you just read it once more for me, please? Item 3 says.
So item 3 is that council resolved to pledge 10% of the project cost up to $50,000 to the inclusive playground project proposed for Boronia Park. 2, that the $50,000 be set aside in the 2019 budget as Huddersfield Council's contribution to the project. And the amendment is that the proposed pledge of $50,000 to funding of an inclusive playground project at Boronia Park be advertised as required under section 356 of the Act, and that submissions are invited.
Councillor Collins?
No.
That's your motion? You happy with that?
That's fine.
Right, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Crassoy. Councillor Collins, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. So this council has previously unanimously decided to build an all-inclusive play space in Hunters Hill, and as we were updated, I think at the last meeting, we've still got consultation going on, but it's looking like we might try to do this at Boronia Park North. There's a lot to be done between now and actually building this playground, but one of the things we do need to do is to source funding. All this does here is to pledge that we are committed to this program. There would be no money leaving the council finances until we are ready to build this, and there's still a lot to happen. But what this will allow us to do is to go to other levels of government and to private enterprise donations and say, look, we've got this pot of money, can you match this, and just sort of work our way through the funding process. This is done side by side with actually the correct consultation, designs, the scope. But if we don't put some skin in the game here, then everyone's just will lose interest. So I'm really keen to to show our support for all the work that the Touched by Olivia Foundation has been doing, which is fantastic. That all these councillors have been supportive up to this point, and I just want to keep this momentum going so we can get this place built. So I do want to make it clear that this is not this money is not to be set aside to do a feasibility study or anything like that. This is for the final project when it is ready to be built, which will then be approved by us, the designs. And at that point in time, then when we're ready to build, then we can tip this money in along with hopefully the other $450,000 or however much we can raise.
Thank you, Councillor. The Speaker against the motion. Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. I'd foreshadow that an alternative motion that the matter be deferred until detailed proposal is submitted for Council's consideration, and the consideration of next year's and deferred until consideration of next year's budget process and priorities for 2019 and 2020. That'd be my foreshadowed motion if this one's defeated. The reason I speak against it is not because I'm against the concept or the project. I think it is much needed and an important part of our playground facilities in Hunters Hill. But I do recall, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I do recall Touched by Olivia making it very clear that there was going to be no cost to Hunters Hill Council for this facility. Hunters Hill Council is providing the land, which is a significant cost. We'll probably have to provide resources and staff for its construction. And I do hear that there's some issues about parking, which in the area may lead to further requirements on council to contribute to this facility. So again, I'm not saying I want every effort made to make this thing come to fruition, but I'm not in a position at this stage to commit $50,000 to a budget. That's basically what we're doing. We may say it's just being parked or whatever, but we have to account for that in our next year's budget. We've worked very hard up to now to make sure that we have a positive outcome for next year. This matter hadn't been brought to our discussions about the budget and has now dropped onto us while we've got our budget on exhibition. I don't think it's fair at this stage, seeing there is no proposal on the table. A few councillors have been involved in the process. The main bulk of councillors haven't been. There are issues that, is there going to be another request for parking changes, which might be another 50,000? I'm not quite sure. So I think it needs to be deferred until we have we have a proposal on the table that we can look at. And if the thing's not going to be built in the next financial year, then we consider it for priorities in the following financial year. But at this stage, I'm keen to make sure that we end up with a surplus in our budget next year. And I don't see adding an extra $50,000 at this stage is going to help us in that process.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody like to speak for the motion?
I would like
Councillor
to.
Crassley.
Thank you. So we actually resolved to do this back in March, as everyone knows, and I won't read out the whole motion, but I just want to read out one part of it. Well, actually, no, I'll read out part one. That Hunters Hill Council endorse and adopt a policy that all upgraded and new play spaces in the LGA are designed to exceed the standards and to meet the principles of universal design. We say a few other things, but then we also say that we establish a short-term project panel of representatives, etc., to identify a suitable plan of action and to consider grant funding opportunities to make a play space a reality by no later than 2020. We resolved that all upgrades and new play spaces are designed to universal standards, and we resolved to seek grant and funding opportunities to make it a reality by no later than 2020. We resolved to do that back in March, before we began our budget planning for the Community Strategic Plan. The previous Community Strategic Plan outlines plans for Boronia Park, and there is, and I think in the Community Strategic Plan, the previous one, it says as funding becomes available. Part of getting this motion to Council in March, it was my hope that getting it through in March would mean that it would go into this Community Strategic Planning process. So we did form a committee, a panel, if you like. And where the panel are at now is that we've identified that if we are to seek funding opportunities, then we need to show that we have some money where our mouth is, if you like. How we find that money is the task for us once we resolve to find it. We resolved to do this back in March. We, in collaboration with Council, with Community Services and with the Play Panel, have identified a play space at the top of Boronia Park which is ripe for upgrade. We resolved in March that all upgrades would meet universal design standards. We've undertaken a memorandum of understanding with Touch by Olivia to push this project forward. We conducted community consultation at the Food and Wine Festival and online. And with all consultation now closed, we've had more than 200 responses from the community, and not one of those community members have said they don't want to see an inclusive space in Hunters Hill. So, we've given an undertaking to make this happen. We need to now find the money to make it happen. Now, I'm not a numbers person. Everyone's got their skills and numbers aren't mine. But I am a passionate person. And the more that I learn about access, the more urgently I realise that we, Hunters Hill, need to address the inaccessibility of our suburb, all of our play spaces. What easier way to do this than by showing state and government bodies and potential private parties who might support funding that we have some skin in the game and that we believe in the game. Because for people who can't access basic play, it's not a game. So a tiny bit of skin. We're talking about taking a little graft off a future budget and putting it aside for if and when the time arises that we need it. And without doing it, we may not be able to secure any funding for this play space that we undertook to deliver by 2020. Now, Councillor Collins is a numbers man. I know, from what I know of him to date, that he is not one to make rash decisions. about how he spends our community finances in collaboration with the rest of us. I know he's been looking closely at our community strategic plan and the future budget for it with the financial team, and he has great respect for our financial team. And if he believes that the team will have the ability to allocate this funding, then I believe in him too. This funding will be our first fully inclusive community asset, and I look forward to being at the table when we say it's going to happen. We can't make it happen without funding. It's out there now. And my fear is that if we don't allocate this commitment now, which we undertook to do back in March, if we don't allocate it now, we may fail to secure the funding that's available now, right now. We need to make it happen in a timely manner. We said we were going to do it. It is my strong recommendation that we don't defer, and I fully support Councillor Collins in his recommendation to put a little money aside to show potential funders that we're in the game and we need their support, to show our community that we're serious about inclusion. And we cannot defer it because we don't think it's in the budget yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Who would like to speak against? Councillor Sanson.
Mr Mayor, it's been an odd meeting tonight. We all seem to be wanting to do the same things. We've got a lot of very similar priorities. It's just how we get to those ends. My concern is that we've got a motion before us and no supporting material. Things I would suggest would be that, we say that the community consultation is concluded. I haven't seen the results of it. That'd be a nice thing to have in a report. I've got a copy of the minutes of the last meeting that I don't think was generally distributed, or that's of the playground project panel, but I don't think it's been distributed to other councillors. The other thing is we've got this fuzzy notion that I find difficult, and it'd be nice if someone could say to me, okay, we're going to spend $500,000. What is it? Just give me some idea what it is we're going to get. It just sort of seems all too abstract to me at the present time. I think we need to firm those sort of details up. The other thing that is of great concern to me is the associated works. I went up and had a look at the site this afternoon, and there are some considerable grades that are going to have to be filled, a great deal of road work in order to provide the parking. I don't believe that's going to be subsidised by any grant we might receive. That's going to be a cost to council. I haven't seen information to know what in this proposal is going to be regarded as capital expenditure that we can depreciate. I haven't seen anything in this report to say what is going to be expensed and what the overall impact will be on our net operating result. But I think that probably for all the things we want to do, I think if not the highest, one of the highest priorities this council has in the 3 short years that we have is to return a balanced or a positive net operating result for this year. If not, we are in a problem in as much as we will fail to meet one of the Fit for the Future thresholds. And I certainly do not want to put us at risk for that reason. That has to be our number one priority. I just want, I'm extremely supportive of this proposal. If it gets deferred for a year, it gets deferred for a year. I don't see how a short time now to get a few facts together is going to overall reduce our chances of achieving this, this outcome that I think we're all very much supportive of. I'm just being cautious. I am very supportive of the work that Councillor Cresswell has done toward this project, but they're my concerns. I just want to better understand what it is we're going to commit $5,000 or $50,000 to.
Thanks, Councillor. Who would like to speak for the motion? Sorry, Councillor Miles.
Okay.
You were first cab off the rank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am supportive of this motion. I'm supportive for a number of reasons, but I'm going to go to Councillor Craswell's speaking to the motion before when she said that without the seed funding, no other funding will become available. And I can assure you, having dealt with state and federal governments before, that if we don't have skin in the game and if we don't match funding, that the state, that we are not utilising our capacity to raise funds through the state and federal governments as well as we should be. We will not get this project off the ground if we are relying just on the Touch for Olivia Foundation, who do fantastic work, but do have to do it across the state, and they have built a number of inclusive play spaces. It can't be left all up to them. They do a lot of good work across Sydney. We need to chuck in some funding, and as Councillor Collins said, this is not money that's coming out of our budget until there is more concrete plans in place, until the consultation has been completed. It is annexed for a project, but it is in our budget, so it will not impact the budget in terms of going into deficit or a recurring deficit. So until we have that commitment, which I hope we're going to make tonight, we're not utilising the funding that we're going to be able to get through the state and feds. And I have to say, I think $50,000 is not going to get us particularly far. I think in future years, we're going to have to be talking about a couple of $100,000. In terms of the original motion that was put, something that is expressed to me again and again is that there is a lack of play spaces within walkable distance of people in Hunters Hill. Buffalo Creek Reserve play space and Baroni Park and another Gladesville Reserve and other small play spaces are wonderful, but Riverglade Reserve, we have made a commitment to putting an active play space there at some point. There are other opportunities around Hunters Hill to make sure that we do build more and better inclusive play spaces, and I think that this is going to be a good pilot project for us, but in the longer term, we're going to be having to look at committing to recurring expenditure in terms of upgrading and building new play spaces, because it's something I keep hearing again and again, is that for residents to go to play spaces with their kids, they're having to get into their car and drive to Buffalo Creek. We are not making these places as accessible as they should be. Without making this commitment tonight or at some future date, but I'm speaking in favour of making this commitment now, we are not going to be able to get the sort of funding that we need to build this thing, because we know that it's going to cost somewhere in the order of $500,000, maybe up to $600,000, $700,000, depending on how far we want to take it. 50 grand in the kitty, and it is in the kitty until we take it out, to get the ball rolling doesn't seem like a stretch to me. I want that extra information. I want the consultation to go forward. I want Touch for Olivia to keep us as involved as possible. We will be the consent authority. It's all up to us. They're our partner, and we shouldn't get caught up with just Touch by Olivia. This is our play space, and we will be the determining authority. They have brought us the idea, and we've signed the MOU with them because they have a good history in creating these active play spaces and have been very effective in utilising partnerships with councils, the federal government and state governments to get them done. So not only do I support this motion, but I think that in a short space of time, if we're going to meet our 2020 commitment, that we're going to have to probably think about putting even more dosh in the kitty.
Would like to speak against? Councillor Williams.
No, I'd just like to ask a question.
Question?
I'm just wondering how we have $50,000 in our budget, but we don't have it in our budget. Could somebody explain to me how it just sits there but doesn't actually come on the balance book, on the balance sheet, please?
Because it's not spent. It's
No, but
annexed.
it's still in the budget.
It's annexed, it's not spent, it's not actually left our account.
But it may. How do you present a budget that you have some things in there that you're not intending to spend?
Well, I think if it's in the budget, yeah, I'm happy to answer it. If it's in the budget, it's something we do intend to spend, and it's something we do intend to spend within that financial year. So it's possible that you can have a budget, but get to the end of the financial year and not spend it. But at the start of the year, it would be our intention to spend that money. So if it's in the budget that's approved, when it's all approved, it would be our intention to spend that money in the year. Now, there's two possibilities here. There's a possibility that it wouldn't fall into the 18-19 year, that it would go to the 19-20 year. That's the first possibility. Even though we may have it in the budget, we may not spend the money in the year. So that's one possibility. The other is, I think, I'd been advised by the General Manager previously that this cost of this may exceed $50,000 quite considerably. We may be expected to match the grant money. So does that answer your question?
Yes, the next question I have is how will $50,000 impact on our projected surplus for next year? Are we able to achieve our surplus goal, which Councillor Sanderson quite rightly stated? Our survival depends on us being able to balance our books. Will $50,000 reduce our buffer to the point that we may or may not be able to meet that commitment of the surplus?
May, is that question clear to you? Is our ability to reach a positive operating result, is that $50,000, which is in the draft budget, is that likely to stop us from achieving a positive operating result?
I think it's already inclusive in yes.
So it's in there, in the draft budget.
The draft.
So the answer is it can be in there and we can still make, if we approve the budget in the form that it's in, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
We made allowance for it.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, so the answer is no. It won't stop us from achieving a positive operating result.
As long as it's only 50,000.
That's all this motion's asking for.
Okay. We can work through the detail later with May if you like.
Can I speak for the motion?
Councillor McLaughlin, please.
The motion as it reads, as I understand it, is we only commit up to $50,000 at this point. So if there is a need for other funds at another point, then that will be an entirely separate motion, I would imagine, and it will be something we'll debate at that point. I agree with this motion, and I agree with putting this money in the budget now, because it is important that we have skin in the game. It shows good faith as well. I want this play space to not be necessarily just a touch by Olivia space. I want it to be a joint project that Hunters Hill Council delivered with the state government. I don't want the state government to have all of the kudos for this. I want Hunters Hill Council to have kudos for having brought this forward. So I think it's very important that we have skin in the game at this point. And the state government has made it very clear that they have a lot of money to throw at play spaces and open recreational spaces. I think it's in that, and because of that, I think that we need to be able to say to them, we've got some money here, we've put some skin in the game, we've shown good faith, give us a whole lot of money in response as well. So, yeah.
Would like to speak against? Anybody else against? I'll speak against the motion. I think when we had the presentation from Touch by Olivia, my understanding was that this was fully funded by government. And in fact, those words were used, that we didn't have to put any money into this. So I think at the time that we agreed to the things you read out, Councillor Crassoy, we were under the impression that we weren't required to make a contribution, financial contribution to this. And so I think we were misled at that point. There was nothing in what you read out which said that we'd contribute funds to the project. That concerns me a great deal, that we got to a point where we agreed to something and we hadn't pinned down the fact of the funds. And it should have been part of the motion. In hindsight, we should have clarified that the funds were available from elsewhere and we weren't required to find any funds. Having said that, I think it is a really important addition to Hunters Hill. I'm not suggesting it's not. I think it really is. I've complimented you previously for such a good initiative. I think it is a good initiative. But I think somewhere along the line, it wasn't made clear to us that we had to fund this. And if it's correct, what the gentleman has shared with me, we may have to fund at least half the cost of it, then I think we're going to be in a bit of trouble here because we never ever expected that when we agreed to this. So I'm speaking against the motion. So is there if there are no further discussion, any further clarifications?
I think I have right.
Did you write a reply?
Yeah. Look, just want to go through a few of the things that were raised here. Look, I don't think that this council is misled at all. We are down the track a bit. We've seen new opportunities, and so we want to take up those opportunities. And I think that's the reason why it's coming to us now and not before. And as I said before, we still have the opportunity to not do this. If it requires more money, that'll be a separate discussion. And if you don't think it's worth it, then of course we can decide that then. As for not having any supporting material, sometimes things like this take a little vision, and that is what I would implore us all to do. There will be plans drawn. They will come to us, and we will all either agree or disagree with it. At the moment, this is a vision, and we are simply doing this to enable us to get funding opportunities to make it a reality. And on that, I'd like to see this happen next year. I'd like to actually see us build this next year, not decide to build it next year. I want my children to be able to enjoy this, not my children's children. As far as the budget effect, this is a one-off payment. It's not a recurring payment. It's $50,000. Much of the savings we have in the bank came from the sale of a community asset. Now we're going to put a little bit back into a community asset. We end up with an asset. It's not an expense. It's an asset, and it's an asset for the community that the community wants. So I would not want to deny the community such a great outcome because we want to save this, save a few numbers on a page. We can afford it. It is not going to have such an impact on the budget that we are going to go broke. We do have budget problems, but that's a discussion for another day. This is just $50,000. It is not an issue. As for how this park's going to be depreciated, I'm at a loss to understand why that's relevant. But I suppose we could cover that in a councillor workshop some other time. But I think I want to stress that it's an asset. It's not an expense, and I really do look forward to seeing this happen if we can get it done. So
thank you,
let's
Councillor.
get it done.
Are there any further clarifications? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried.
If I may, Mr Mayor, Councillor Sanderson in his response suggested he had a copy of some minutes of a meeting. Playground meeting of some
They're just
sort.
not in here yet.
Yeah, the minutes of
The play panel.
play panel, which I'm a member of, but unfortunately I haven't been able to attend a meeting as yet. I apologise for the first two times because the meeting got shifted from the original planned date. The last one happened to be on the day before my partner flew overseas.
Who's the chair of the committee?
Me. It's a play panel, not a committee.
Could we get a copy of the minutes?
It was only.
We just
It was the other
Monday.
day.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, so there was only held
It's
last
yet
week?
Monday.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, okay, right.
Not even.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they're not here. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we move to item 4.1, Delegate Authority Report. Has everyone had a chance to look at that? Question or you moving that?
I'll move it, but I'd like to say.
Move Councillor Williams. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Sanderson. Do you have a question or do you have a question?
I'll second it, but I'd like to make a comment on it if I could.
All right, well, perhaps Councillor Williams has moved the motion. Councillor Williams, do you would like to go further with that?
I'll only to say that I note in the report there's 8 trees to be removed in Hunters Hill as a result of the report. 8+ trees actually, because one doesn't specify the number, it just says removal of trees. So that's one question, but in general, there's no real supporting documentation or comment. Removal of trees for what purpose, for what's going to be put in its place. Likewise with some of the developments here, it's just approved without any explanation as to what issues were considered. The refusals are great. They give us very detailed information as to the basis of the refusal. But I think we need to look a bit more at how we present the approvals so that we get a better understanding of the basis for the approval. So I compliment the staff on the improving nature of this reporting process, but I would like to see the reporting expanded a little bit to take those comments into account. More specifically, in relation to page 9, it relates to a flow over from 8, which is application 58272. The determination and the refusal for the removal of the tree, which I congratulate the staff on, but the reasons, first 2 reasons are okay, but as we get further down into the reasoning, it tends to lose me a little bit as to its basis for being a refusal. So I think staff might like to have a closer look at those dot points and modify them so that they reflect what's intended, which is a refusal. So with those comments, I'm quite happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor, did you have a question or a comment?
I was going to make similar comments to Councillor Williams, so I won't add further to those.
Right. Anybody who would like to speak?
Sorry, I've just got one question, if I could.
Question? Question on?
Page 2, DA 2018 1014, removal of 4 trees, no replacement planting required. Could I get some clarification on that? We're taking up 4 trees, but
Mr. Grievous?
not replacing any?
From memory and through you, Mayor, was basically there was no room for additional planting. I asked the same question, and the planting that left the subject site were inappropriate species.
Okay.
I asked the same question because we have a policy of 1 removal, 1 replacement, but it needs to just be justified, and you've got existing landscapings on the subject sites that don't lend itself for additional landscaping, and also the topography of the land will not lend itself for other landscaping as well. This one in particular had numerous landscaping on the subject site, so it doesn't warrant any further landscaping.
Any further questions or clarifications? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. 4.2, Development Control Unit Report. Moved Councillor Williams, second Councillor Miles. Any questions? Any clarifications?
Just to say a comment, Mr. Mayor, there's a removal of a tree, but really no reason for it. In was it 20161121-2? I just seek a bit more information in those determinations.
Can I just assist through you there? It's the The proposal is where we say the original proposal was basically for alterations and additions, first floor additions and plus removal of tree. That was the approval granted. The next box shows you a new clause 4.55, which is basically old section 96, an amendment. So this proposal is an amendment which modified the roof and materials and rear alterations on the upper level. Had no amendment or proposal to do anything with landscaping or trees. So, and that was the approval for the section 96. The previous removal of trees was a previous application that was done in the past. And also, try to put the value in there as well, and also the importance of the landscape area. And the reasons why I go back to this is the Development Control Unit, which is chaired by the General Manager. The previous reports in the boxes reflect applications that had no issues, fully compliant, and comply with the landscape area and no objections from neighbours. That's why we put minimal explanation. If there is an explanation with regard to something extraordinary, we would put it in there, but there's no delegation for that to happen. However, the refusals are there to explain to everybody the reasons why the refusal was determined in that fashion.
Any further clarifications, questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried. 4.3, report on legal matters.
Move the motion.
Councillor Williams, second Councillor McLaughlin. All right. Are there any queries, any comments? Councillor Williams?
Yeah, Mr Mayor. I was just wondering to assist me, and I don't know whether it will assist other councillors, but in the report, the second column, it says matter name. It doesn't really say what the issue is about in some cases. In other cases it does. Vegetation clearing, the first one, unlawful structures, but you get further on and for instance on page 19, 673723, it doesn't really let you know what the purpose of the matter is, which is just a minor thing, but it would help to include in that column, as you do in some of them, what the basis, because then it makes more sense to understand where it is in the report.
Do you mean if it's about a dwelling house or a tree or something like a class 1 or something?
Yeah.
So side name and issue, thanks. Very clearly identified what the issue is.
In some you do it, and some it leaves it a little bit open as to what we're talking about. Just would help in understanding the report.
Good suggestion. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Late report, please.
That.
Late report. Late report, Steve.
He can watch it on the stream.
You miss it.
We got the late report.
I'll move the motion.
Move Councillor McLaughlin, second Councillor Williams. Any discussion on the matter required?
Good job, team.
Just give me a minute.
Can I just rise to say, again, this is a fantastic outcome for our community, and congratulate council staff and our legal team on getting to this point. This is the kind of thing we like to see happening in Hunters Hill. Successful prosecution of removal of vegetation and trees, and in this case, we've had a very, very good outcome. I would just also like to add that I'm wondering I'd like to ask the question, do we have a mechanism for following up on the reinstatement of trees? Not just for issues that come before us legally, but also just in the general DAs that have removal of one tree, replacement with another. Do we have a mechanism to follow that up?
There is a standing condition of consent that is proposed, and we do put a mechanism in place where the outdoor staff do inspect, and a few times it's unfortunate that applicants not follow through. The other issue that we have, the applicants sell and move on, and trying to explain to new occupiers that the development does go with the land, even though they weren't part of that proposal or knew anything about it. And that's some of the issues we've been finding lately.
Great. No, I just think it's really important that we follow up that even though we do get all our money back and we have a great result and a great prosecution and there's fines involved in this process, that we do follow up and make sure that those trees are put back.
We have a very stringent and
Yes.
exciting
Once
team
again,
that...
congratulations on the successful prosecution.
Very good. Any further questions, clarifications? Councillor Williams.
I'd like to speak to the motion, Mr Mayor. I think it's very important for council to stand by its values, and I'll just read out the conclusion here which the staff have given. The successful prosecution is a reminder of the importance council places upon the local environment and the seriousness that council places upon complying with the law for tree removal. The case is also a warning to residents that if people arrive at your door claiming that trees can be cut down and that no council approval is required, inquiries should be made of the council to verify whether the person is telling the truth or not. We are constantly receiving cards and approaches from tree loppers or apparent tree loppers for removal of unwanted vegetation on our properties. And I think this is a timely warning to people that they need to make sure they have the appropriate approvals and that has been considered by the staff to be an approved tree lopping or removal. This case has got a result of severe penalties for the person that has done the wrong thing, and it does show the determination and the capability of our staff to pursue these issues to a conclusion that makes sure that people doing the wrong thing are brought before the courts and the appropriate fines and penalties are put in place. So I'd like to also congratulate the many staff and the legal team that pursued this matter with vigour and with determination and have succeeded, not just for council but for our community, in getting a very clear decision from the court and a very clear support of our intent to retain our tree canopy cover and all the important values that go along with trees in our neighbourhood. So congratulations to the staff. And I see this as a salient reminder to our residents that they need to go through the appropriate process if they wish to remove or prune vegetation in our municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Moved, Councillor Williams. Seconded. McLaughlin. Sorry, Councillor McLaughlin. Moved, Councillor Williams. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's carried. 8.2 is the quarterly budget review as of the 31st of March.
Which position will now be improved by $75,000. Thank you, the recovery of legal costs from Mr. Gregor.
Thank you. I have a query. I just have a question on this. I didn't quite understand the notes on 106. Could you help me with that, May? I didn't understand note 2 to reflect reduction in expenditure contra item 1.
Yes, that's related to the council's meeting that the work and asset engineering put it up down in November last year to remove a couple of the capital work on the road and propose a new road for that work. So I have to reschedule in my work capital to reduce that out.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Moved. Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you, May. I think we moved to 9.1. The minutes of the Hunters Hill Events Advisory Committee. Moved Councillor Crassoy, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Crassoy.
I'd actually like to put a motion to this report as well, if I could.
So it's a receive and note at present. How would you like that altered?
I'd like to amend it to recommend to council, and I'd welcome the input of my fellow councillors or the general manager. There's a point in this report about the Hunters Hill Street Feast not being viable for council to run in November. Some other dates were tossed around. We just feel that November, the event committee feel that November really is the only viable date to hold the Hunters Hill Street Feast. And after this meeting, I did have further discussion with Garnet Meekins, who's the chair of Discover Hunters Hill, who also sits on the events committee. And I asked him whether Discover Hunters Hill would be interested in partnering with council to run the street feast, which they did in the second year of the event. And what that would involve is support from council without putting quite a time on the event coordinator's limited time budget at that time of year. Because I had understood Street Feast was going ahead, I have already been given an undertaking from the two major sponsors, so we do have the funding available to run the event. And so it really is a case of council staff not having the time to allocate to it. So I would like to put the motion that council have a discussion with Discover Hunters Hill about them running the event in collaboration with council as a business and community networking event, which was always the intent of the event anyway, with the funding available to it and perhaps with some support of an intern and some support from council staff, hopefully alleviating a lot of time pressure on Esther. The fundamentals of the event are already in place.
So your motion is?
So is it the same weekend, 17, 18 November? Or?
Yeah, potentially the Sunday, which would put less pressure on the businesses.
Sunday evening.
Yeah. That's the main feedback we've had from the businesses over the year is that.
So your motion is, could you read it out?
Yeah.
Can I suggest let's make it a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Council discussed with Discover Hunters Hill the option of holding a street feast on 17th and 18th of November in collaboration with council.
You happy with that?
Yes.
Does that cover everything? All right. So we receive and note the minutes of the meeting, and we add that to it. All right. Any questions, comments? Those in favour? Against? It's carried. Minutes of the Hunters Hill Access Advisory Committee. And the recommendation is on page 120. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Crassoy. Any comments, any queries? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried.
Just in respect of, if I could, the comment in there about no disabled parking at the deck house. I think we should write to the Harbour Trust and ask them why not. I think there is too, but obviously some said there's not.
Maybe not access to it.
We don't have to admit that, but that's what we'll do because we're not the consent authority.
You don't want us to put a recommendation?
No, we'll just do it.
But just a question on that though, I know that the deck house do allow parking for elderly.
I'm very confident that it's there as well.
There is.
But we'll double check, and if it's not, we'll write to the trust and say why not. I'm sure it'll be.
I've used it for my parents before, so I know it's there.
9.3. Report on councillors' briefing and workshops. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I don't believe the report provides enough detail to enable the community to understand what the briefings were about. I've raised this issue on numerous occasions, and I believe the community deserve more detail as to what the issues were and what the information was exchanged from the staff to the councillors. So I can't support the motion on that basis.
Would you like to suggest an addition to the recommendation?
Suggest an addition. I've already made the point that I don't think it's adequate in conveying to the community the information that was exchanged at the meeting. I could ask for it to be brought back with more details. Would be my preferred option, and I would then be able to support the outcomes of that workshop. But not quite sure what you're asking.
Could I just refer back to the General Manager for a moment? General Manager?
Yeah, look, I could have, to be fair, I agree with Councillor Williams, and we certainly have endeavoured to provide more information, but there really wasn't a lot said at that briefing because everything needed to be said, and that's why I specifically put Medium Density Housing Code item 4.2 on the agenda. So if someone was reading this and wanted to find out what happened, all I've got to do is go to 4.2 on the agenda and read it. Similarly with the CSP and the budget, they go to items 8.3 and 8.4 on the agenda and they find out everything that needed to happen. I really couldn't add anything to that other than what was discussed on the agenda, and that's why I made that reference. But I'm quite happy if in future, if you want a bit more detail around those things, we're trying, and I take it on board.
Yes, I acknowledge that you reference reports in the agenda, but people have to go and find those reports. I think a summary or a précis, I'm not talking about pages, I'm talking about whatever the conclusions were in that item could be just added in there so that
we can do that.
Completeness.
Yep, we can do that.
All right, so we've got a mover and a seconder, so can I put the motion? Those in favour? Against? Carried. 2 dissenters. Would you like to have your names noted?
Yes, please.
Councillor Williams and Councillor Sanderson. Yes, Councillor Sanderson. 9.4, Councillors' Workshop.
Move the recommendation.
Moved Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Collins. Any further discussion? All in favour? Against? That's carried. Unanimous. 9.5, Bushland Management Working Party. Question?
I'm going to move the recommendation.
Moved Councillor McLaughlin.
I'll just rise again.
Seconded by Councillor Grassoy.
To talk about there are things in this report that probably shouldn't.
This is the deferred report.
Oh, this is the deferred report.
Last month.
Okay. It's still in there.
Yep. It explains them. Yep.
So we deferred this report from last meeting, and it still contains the.
Page 162, there's comments by the author, but it doesn't remove or...
Yeah. Okay.
So, any further questions, comments? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I note the comments of the staff member on that page I referred to, 162, but the time put in by our committee members is valuable. And I believe committees should focus on what their charter is. And as was indicated at the last meeting, that there are elements in this report, particularly section 2, and possibly 6, that step well beyond the role of that committee. And I would think the valuable time should be focused more clearly on the bush management side of things rather than the strategic and the broader direction. So I still, even though I didn't have the chance to speak last time because I was acting mayor, I think elements in this report and the committee need to reflect on what their charter is and focus back down on the key elements to support their role in bush management.
We've had that discussion with the staff member involved, and that's what will happen.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 9.6, Conservation Advisory Panel.
Moved.
Second.
Moved Councillor Miles, second Councillor Williams. Any questions, clarifications, comments? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr Mayor. The committee also considered it would be valuable if they also had a bit of a view on what the trust has spoken to, the Huntersville Trust has spoken to the council about, which is the new green book and the revision of that. I don't think it's minuted here, but there was some discussion about that, and that the panel
166, I think.
Yes, 4.2. Yep. So I think that's important to note that that book and the role of the panel can contribute to that, but otherwise the report is self-explanatory.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? I'll put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. So we move on to 12.1.
In relation to the meetings, the proposed councillors' workshop for next Monday night's not on the agenda, or not on this list, but I'm wondering, given the work that we've done so far, do any councillors feel that we need to have a further workshop on the CSP and budget next Monday night? Well, Councillor Williams will be in Canberra.
I'll be on holiday.
I'd like a briefing on it, but
Well,
we don't have to run a full meeting.
We're happy to
for
do
me.
that because you've missed out on the previous
Yep.
two, so we're happy to do that for you. So unless there's some burning desire to have a meeting next Monday night, I'm suggesting we won't do it. But if councillors have got any particular questions or concerns about it, send them in or come and see me or bring us up. It's fine. We're happy to go through anything you like, but I'm not sure that we actually need a full-on meeting of everybody because
Is it in there?
unless someone's got, no, it's not in there. That's why I raised.
All right. So I'll put the motion.
Oh, sorry, I've just got a couple of
Movements.
questions.
We should go back to who's going to move it. Moved Councillor Miles, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, there's no cap in here for the 20th of June. Oh, is there?
Yep.
Third one down.
Oh, okay, sorry. And also there's a date for the Art Exhibition Advisory Committee meeting, which is the 26th of the 6th. If anybody would like to attend.
Yep, I'd like to attend that. 6th of the 6th. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? It's carried. Are there any further matters we need to discuss tonight? Any questions without notice? Any notice without questions? No question? One question? Thank you, Councillor Crasso. That's been tabled. Is there nothing further to do? I'll close the meeting. We're closed at 10:20 p.m. Thank you all.